For the sake of time this morning, I'm not going to review any of our previous message because the list is getting quite long. I hope that you've had a chance to catch some of it and that you've been encouraged and challenged by what it is that you've heard. The Daniel series has been building on this idea that in the past 100 years, we have seen the church move from a significant central position in our society to the relative obscurity of its fringes in some ways. We no longer occupy a dominant position in our culture. But this doesn't mean we don't have influence.
That's right. That's right.
Let me say that again. That doesn't mean that we've not got influence. Yeah. There are challenges we face as we seek to bring that influence. Because we're not dominating our society, we are infiltrating it. So I think we're seeing a new generation of Daniels kind of moving their faith, their Christianity, their relationship with God from just being inside the church out to infiltrate every area of our society. We are not abandoning the church. I am more committed than I've ever been to this expression. But I do believe that it's time that we stretch the borders. Let's stretch the borders out past here to the very edge of our community. So we've looked at a number of quotes, but I want to read this one again. It says, no matter how big the church attendance is on Sunday, it will never penetrate the culture with Jesus. The reason is clear. The church on Sunday is experienced by the church community. However, Monday through Saturday, the church operates in the experience of not yet believers. It lives on their turf, moves in their society, and operates in their culture. On Monday, Jesus infiltrates through you. And because he can be seen and touched, he can be received or rejected, and true evangelism is possible. Do we see that as being what we are doing tomorrow? We're off to be evangelists. You know, this is not the first time, and I don't think it'll be the last time, that God has employed this infiltration strategy. From the beginning, his plan has been to touch the whole world with his love, and he wants all mankind to hear the good news. So what does he do? He needs to spread us out a little bit. But it's not our natural inclination, is it? It's the old birds of a feather flock together. We like to hang out with people who are like us. And so one of God's very successful methods of dispersion is opposition. When you're trying to hide, it doesn't pay to huddle with the group. God uses opposition to scatter his people, to infiltrate culture and spread the gospel. There's a great example of this in Acts chapter 8. I'm going to read that. You can turn there if you want to. Saul was there giving approval to Stephen's death, and this is in verse 1. On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church at Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him. But Saul began to destroy the church, going from house to house. He dragged off men and women and put them in prison. Verse 4, those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. Wow. Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. There's this old proverb that says, prosperity has often been fatal for Christianity, but persecution never has. You know, if we insist on hiding behind these four walls and keeping the good news to ourselves, if we won't go willingly and purposefully into our culture, then God finds a way of pulling down the walls. Yeah, it's good. We don't often think of opposition like that. That it's actually God pulling down the walls of separation between the church and the world. Someone once said that God is not so much interested in our comfort as he is in our character. And I think it is also true to say that we are not here on this earth for God to pamper us, but to fulfill God's purposes. He is single-minded in his plan to get all of mankind to have the opportunity to hear about him and to have the opportunity to receive him. And he's not above using our discomfort. He's not above using our discomfort through opposition and persecution to do that. So this morning, I want us to look at and to think about the challenge of opposition. The challenge of opposition. Now, when I think about how we experience opposition in our culture, and I compare that to our brothers and sisters in countries around the world where they are experiencing severe persecution, I hesitate to use that word. I sort of feel like it's somewhat a little insulting to them to insinuate that what we're experiencing is the same. But there's no doubt in my mind that we are moving increasingly into a time where opposition is only on the increase. We're going to experience that personally, and I think that we're going to also see it in a more official capacity via laws and policies of government. And I think that is coming, if it is not already here. John 15, Jesus said, "If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, and I have chosen you out of the world, and this is why the world hates you." It's such a strong, even as that's coming out my mouth, man, that's strong. And I don't want you to hear that or read that and be thinking about, don't think about people. People don't hate you. But the spirit of the world hates you. It hates you because you belong to God. The spirit of the world hates the people that belongs to itself, because that's the very nature of that spirit. Daniel experienced opposition. Conflict is inevitable when we take a stand on things that God will not negotiate on. Daniel's a great example because we can see him. There are times when he does negotiate a compromise. And then there are other times where it's just like, sorry, there is no compromise on this one. It's not a popular aspect of the Christian message, though, is it really? People want to hear about living their best life, not dying their best death. No one wants to be hated. And I think we like to think that we're Christians, we're nice people, and so people should like us. And maybe we have this idea about church that it's going to become so relevant and so loving and so inoffensive that the world will realize how truly great we actually are and love us back. I don't know that's going to happen. Luke 6 says, "Woe to you when all men speak well of you." For Daniel, God's favor brought opposition. He'd been strategically placed by God, and God's favor on his life brought promotion to him. So obviously he's got incredible abilities. I'm not trying to dumb him down, but I think we also need to see that actually what caused him to rise to the position that he did was because God had this big spiritual highlighter and just wrote it over his life so that he was noticed. And that can happen for some of us as well. Come with me to Daniel. We're going to start in 1, but we're going to wander around a little bit. Daniel chapter 1, verse 20. I'm just going to take a moment to go as well. Actually, I'm not, because I can't read it anyway. Don't know why I do that. I bring it up here because it's so important. So important. But yeah, I need glasses to read it now. So, okay. Daniel 1 verse 20. It says, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them, this is the Daniel generation, 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. Wow. God had given favor to Daniel and his friends, and that gave them favor with mankind. But it did not mean everybody loved them. Let's turn to chapter 6. In this chapter, the king is now Darius the Mede, who had conquered Belshazzar. And he rules his kingdom by appointing 120 satraps, I guess, who are some kind of leaders. And these were led by 3 administrators, of whom Daniel was one. So picking it up in verse 3, it says, now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities. I love that New American Standard says that he possessed an extraordinary spirit. I've always loved that. Now the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So it appears that in the background, the king has got these ideas that he's going to elevate Daniel even further. Verse 4, at this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, get this, unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So Daniel's opposition challenge begins with just a simple seed of jealousy. And God's favor on your life can actually attract negative attention.
That's right.
As God promotes us, jealousy and envy can become catalysts for opposition. I kind of alluded to this before, but I need to bring this one home today. So it's so important that we realize that our battle is not against flesh and blood. The origin of our opposition is not other people. But the devil tries to draw us in and distract us by getting us to fight with people. Ephesians chapter 6 verse 12 is that scripture. We are in a spiritual struggle with a spiritual enemy. You know, and it's hard because I can see we are experiencing, the opposition is coming via people. And they don't understand that what they are reacting to in us is not actually us, it's the spirit that is in us. And what we can forget is that what is opposing us is not that person, but the spirit that is in that person. So we've got this, it's a spiritual battle. And we cannot compromise with the spirit of the world, but we got to remember that our conflict is not with people. We're not up against the unbelievers. We're not up against the humanists or the socialists or the government. We are up against the spirit of this world that wants to conform us into its image. And Daniel understood this. He knew, I'm not fighting the satraps and the administrators. I am resisting a spiritual force that is dominating over this culture. So, back to the story. The jealous satraps realize they're going to have to set Daniel up to get him. So they go to King Darius, who is just a bit oblivious to the intrigue, and they create a situation that's going to pit Daniel against the king. So they passed the law that made it illegal to pray to anyone but the king for 30 days. And according to the laws of the Medes and the Persians, this law could not be repealed, even by the king. He can't change his mind once he's set it in motion. So verse 10. So what does Daniel do? Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. These men went as a group They didn't go alone, did they? They had to go as a group to get one guy. Anyway, back to the story. They found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So immediately they find him, killed him in the act, and they go back to the king to tell on him. And we can see God's favor even on Daniel at this point. It says in verse 14, when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel, and he made every effort until sundown to save him. But as the satraps had already anticipated, there was nothing the king could do. And so he gave the order and brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. And the king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you. You know, when we find ourselves in a position where we have to refuse to compromise with ungodliness, sometimes you find yourselves at like a polite impasse. You know, we're just going to agree to disagree. And it's all very nice and that's okay. But I think that it pays to have given some thought to how far we are prepared to take this. Because the time is coming, if it's not already here, where there are situations where only one person can win. And so, yeah, we've got to decide, is this the hill to die on? So for those of you who are familiar with the story, Daniel conquered the opposition challenge. God conquered the lions. And the ones who had opposed Daniel ended up caught in their own trap. So it's a great story, a great story. As a follower of Jesus, have you ever experienced opposition because of your faith?
Yeah.
Maybe it was a snide comment or a snub. Maybe your godly intentions have been misunderstood or misinterpreted. Perhaps you've been excluded from a group or missed out on a promotion at work. Have you been treated differently because of people's prejudices about Christians? I mean, I'm sure you've shared this pain. When you're out socially and people tell people that you're a pastor, it's like every inch of stupidity comes out about people's prejudices and preconceptions about what that must say about who I am. Some of it is so far from the truth is what that annoys me about it. So I just had to get that one out. Excuse me for that. What about, have you had your values mocked or ridiculed? Yeah, come on, what do you need to do that for? Have you suffered verbal aggression, harassment, or hostility because of your beliefs? Anyone? This is the opposition challenge. This is the opposition challenge. Jesus said in John 15, do you remember what I told you? A servant is not greater than its master. Since they persecuted me naturally, they will persecute you. So if it's good enough for Jesus, then I think it's probably something we need to expect that is going to come to us at some point. In Hebrews chapter 12, Paul said, consider him, he's talking about Jesus, who endured such opposition from sinners so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners. Opposition is inevitable. What are we going to do with it? How does God want us to respond? How can we face the challenge of opposition and successfully navigate our way through those situations? I want to finish this morning with 3 ideas. 3 ideas from the life of Jesus, and then I want to flick back as we finish to Daniel, and then we'll be done. So the first one is that Jesus refuted opposition with his words. Jesus refuted opposition with his words. Refute means to prove something to be false or incorrect. In Mark chapter 12, there's a story about Jesus. He's with some religious and political leaders, and they are trying to get him to incriminate himself by making a treasonous statement against Caesar. which was a big deal, to be fair. And so they want to know, well, should we be paying taxes? So they're creating a scenario where whatever way he answers is bad. But Jesus, in his great wisdom, asks them for a coin, and he says, tell me, whose inscription is on this? Or whose head is on, we have the head of our king now, apparently. And they say, well, it's Caesar's. And he says, well, you should give to Caesar's what belongs to Caesar. And then I love it. He doesn't just start with that, which would have been very cool on its own. And then he says, but you should give God what belongs to God. Amazing. Clearly there is a time to defend ourselves by talking. Jesus said it in Matthew 10, he says, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves, therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Very interesting picture. Shrewd as snakes. Are you shrewd as a snake? Motive is so important when we are encountering opposition. What is the thing that's actually moving our action? Shrewd is about our ability to discern a situation and discern people's motives. Yeah. When we're encountering opposition, we need to be shrewd. What did Jesus do? He saw beyond what they were saying on the surface and determined what their hearts were really doing and was able to respond wisely. Innocent as doves, I think, is about our own motives. What's our own motive? Are we responding? Are we speaking out of anger? Are we speaking out of frustration? Look, I get it. I get angry and frustrated. But I know that when I'm in a crucial moment, that taints what comes out. And so it doesn't really reflect all that God might want me to communicate in that moment, because actually all people see is my anger and my frustration. They don't hear what I say. So there's also a time to go on the offensive with our actions. Jesus resisted and challenged opposition with his actions. He didn't just talk, he did. I think that too often we can make the mistake of measuring this by our perception of its effectiveness. So I'll stand up and do something as long as it gets the result that I think is worth it for that. Do you understand what I'm saying? We think it's only worth doing if we win. I can't tell you how many times God has spoken to me about standing up when there was no way I could win. We think we should only do that if the world is watching. But I want to remind you something. When you stand up, there is someone who sees everything, who is always watching. Even when we don't have the attention of the world, God sees it. God sees it. And so to stand up for righteousness is never the wrong thing to do. Never the wrong thing to do. So, there's a time for action. In Luke chapter 19, the money changers and the retailers, nothing wrong with retailers, just not in the church. Please don't sell your shoes here. They were defiling the temple. Jesus could not compromise with that. And so he acted. Bold actions, and cleared the temple out. Did that permanently fix the problem? I have no idea. Perhaps they were all back there the week later. But Jesus was like, no, this is the appropriate response for this moment. There's a time for talking, a time for action, but over it all is God's sovereignty. And my last example is that Jesus yielded to opposition and gave up his rights. In my reference there is a story in Matthew where Jesus is betrayed. and handed over to the people who opposed him. He experienced opposition as betrayal, unjust accusation, and murder. And he yielded. Now I want you to get this. He did not yield to those who opposed him. He yielded to God's will. He did not yield to those who opposed him. He yielded to God's will. I want to finish here because sometimes I wonder whether we've got this perception that to yield is to do nothing. Yielding takes as much faith and courage as it does to speak and as it does to act. If we go back to Daniel and look at how he and his friends responded to opposition, I'm open to your insights on it, but it seems to me that this is the path that they took. They yielded to the situation and its consequences and relied on God's hand for vindication and deliverance. If you're still in Daniel, turn with me to chapter 3, verse 16, because I just love this little bit. They're about to be thrown into the fiery furnace. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and verse 16 says, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. The time for talking is done. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, then the God we serve is able to deliver us, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. So countercultural. Love it. They didn't seek to defend themselves or excuse their actions. They didn't demand their human rights or, protest their ill treatment, which they probably felt entitled to do. It's unconventional in the world, but it's also a bit unusual even in the church. There's a version of Christianity that gets sold that's self-focused, self-seeking, and it's all about what I can get out of this. And the idea that maybe my allegiance to Jesus might cost me something is so far from our thoughts. So no surprises when we've got that attitude, when it's all about me and what I can get out of this, then as soon as opposition comes, what's our default response? I should be able, this is my right, to be able to serve God without this impinging on my life in any way. As I was preparing this message, the avalanche of scriptures about opposition and persecution, honestly, I was I cannot even literally say them all or refer to them. So I'm trying to weed it down. If you have read your Bible, it speaks about, this is what it talks about. The idea that it's not going to cost us anything is a dream. Matthew 16, what did Jesus say to his disciples? Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross. He didn't say, take up your placard. He didn't say, get your keyboard out and start typing wildly on Facebook. Releasing all your righteous indignation about how badly you've been treated. I just want to say, I'm trying to be funny. There is a place for both of those things. But he didn't say that though, did he? He said, take up your cross. Take up the instrument of my death and your sacrifice and follow me. It's going to cost you something. Let's stand together. Speak. Act. Yield. The trick is knowing when to use what, right? What moment am I in? Am I in the time to speak? Am I in the time to act? Or am I in the time to yield? And this is why it's so important that we have a daily personal relationship with God. Because the only way you're going to have the wisdom for that is by listening to him speak to you. He's going to tell you. Just pass me my thing. I want to just read this little scripture. I didn't read it before. You know, sometimes we're so scared about what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Be on your guard. You'll be handed over to the local councils and be flogged in the synagogues. On my account, you will be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, do not worry about what to say or how to say it. At that time, you will be given what to say. For it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you.